Well, hi everybody. This is Jerry Rackley. With Demand Metric, and I am joined by Suzanne Carowan. Suzanne, I think you're there with me, I hope.
Hey, Jerry. Hey, everyone. Yeah, welcome into our program that we started here at High Road Solution under our High Road U Educational Initiative brand. Our new program really is allowing us to get true access to an industry analyst so we can really hear the latest and greatest insight, research that's going on, really straight from direct from the analyst's mouth. And today we're joined with Jerry Rackley, you just heard, who's the Chief Strategist at Demand Metric, who's going to give us really some interesting information on what's happening in event marketing. Before we do that, though, just a couple of housekeeping notes. You can see at the bottom of your screen you're going to have a widget for Q&A as well as one for a social media type of widget. Feel free during the conversation in the course of this webinar, if you have a thought, if you have some commentary, if you've got a question that you would like Jerry to be able to either cover or answer, go ahead and put that into the chat box. I myself will moderate it. At the end of this, at the end of Jerry's presentation per se, we'll come back and I'll ask those questions on your behalf and we'll engage a bit of a dialogue. Also, after the event, if you have some other further questions, we'll give you some follow-up emails with where you can send those questions so we can add that back into our blog, and we'll do a follow-up synopsis on this as well as this will be available for on-demand. So aside from those few housekeeping notes, this is meant to be a fun, upbeat, informative, hopefully thought-provoking, which Jerry it always is, type of webinar series. So I hope that you join us for the rest of them. We'll run throughout 2016. And with no further ado, Jerry, I'll hand it over to you.
Well, thanks a lot, Suzanne, and I've enjoyed the opportunities we've had to do things together in the past, so I'm delighted to be part of this webinar series, and you put a little pressure on me. You said fun, so I'm going to do my best to make sure there's a fun component to what we talk about today. And events are fun. We like events as marketers, we like events as attendees, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And let me just kind of set the stage for our discussion. Many marketing and sales teams believe events are a strategy for accelerating the development of customer and member engagement, and we're going to find out for sure, in fact, they are. We know that, right? Events provide all the ingredients that you need to achieve the kind of engagement that you want. You usually have great face-to-face or at least interpersonal interaction with customers. It's in a controlled setting. It's designed to showcase your brand, your organization. So sales teams and relationship managers have historically relished the opportunity to be at events and interact with the people who come there because it really helps them advance their relationships and engage much more effectively. So if you look at events, they are the broadest, deepest touch point for many members and customers during their life cycle relationship with an organization. And if you look at the marketing side of this, marketing's experienced a pretty big shift over the last decade. Today, marketing effectiveness is synonymous with exploiting current technology, being data-driven, and emphasizing customer or member engagement. Technology is one of those things that enables marketing to perform, and engagement is often the objective, and data provides us with the scorecard. So if you look at engagement, it's the common denominator of a lot of things we have as marketing goals. We want greater conversion rates, for example. We want advocacy. We want, shorter sales cycles, better ROI. We want all these things. And the modern marketer does many things in pursuit of those, but most of them are in some way, shape, or form linked to driving engagement. So there's my setup for our topic. Let's take a look at where we're headed. We have an agenda. It's short, but I'm going to go into some detail on each one of the things you see here. Actually kind of done the introduction for you already. I have a study. I'm going to share results with you all, and then we're going to talk about what's next. What are some action steps when it comes to events? So with that said, Suzanne has already introduced me, so let me give you the visual. Sorry about that. That's as good as it gets anymore, but that's me. I am the Chief Analyst at Demand Metric. I wear a couple different hats as well. I also am an adjunct marketing faculty member at Oklahoma State University, so kind of school's in session. And literally today, when I'm done with the webinar, I will go off and teach one of my classes. So I very much enjoy the role of educator. So anyway, let's jump into this topic, events marketing, since we're going to talk about that today. It does kind of make sense to begin with a definition of events marketing, but you know what? Before I share one, Suzanne, you did put the pressure on me to have a little fun, right? I heard you say fun. So we're going to have some. We're going to have, yeah, you did. So I'm taking up the gauntlet. So here is the fun part of the presentation, at least one of them anyway. So here's what I got for you. Some trivia, because I like trivia. So here's my question for everyone who's listening. Which of these concert events that I'm about to show you was the largest in history? All right, think about this. Plus, now as I share these, shoot us a comment in the comments section or question section if you happen to have been to any of these, all right? So here's the first one. Number one, Woodstock, 1969 up in New York. Remember the Summer of Love? Well, here's your concert event if you were a flower child. And we had legendary artists like Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Santana, and The Who, just a few of those who performed there. So that's your first choice. Remember the question, which is the biggest concert event in history? All right, here's your second choice. We've got Simon and Garfunkel, their second reunion concert in Central Park in 1981. This was a free event that was also televised on HBO. So choice number three, Garth Brooks, also in Central Park. We kind of have a theme here, all three of these so far in New York. Garth Brooks, the cowboy, hits the city, performing his classics like Friends in Low Places and The Dance. And finally, your fourth choice on this little trivia question is Rod Stewart at Copacabana Beach in 1994, which happened to be a New Year's celebration in Rio de Janeiro. So, which one was the biggest? Well, you can send in your guess if you want. Would love to know if some of you actually got to attend any of these. I unfortunately did not, but here we go. Here are the numbers. You ready? So Woodstock, 400,000 people. Simon & Garfunkel, 500,000. Garth Brooks, 750,000. And if you can sense the pattern we got going here, the largest one in history was the last one, Rod Stewart at Copacabana Beach. So there you go. Suzanne, did you happen to make any of these events?
Wow, I missed all of these, and I'm blown away. I had Rod Stewart over. I had a feeling it's going to be over 1 million, but not 3.5 million. So that's something.
Yeah, I think that was probably one of the. Yeah, I mean, it's an event like that. You think from a historical standpoint, oh, how great would it have been to be a part of it? But I would think, oh gosh, being in a crowd of 3.5 million people, no thanks. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Just to kind of get our thinking oriented around events. So there you go. There's the fun part. Now back to business. All right, the fun's over. Let's get back to business and talk about events. So here's your definition of our topic. Event marketing is a promotional strategy that involves direct, often face-to-face contact between organizations and their stakeholders, whether they're members, supporters, employees, customers, donors, etc. This contact takes place at special events like trade shows, conferences, benefits, concerts, fairs, sporting events. And events marketing is effective because it engages stakeholders while they're in a willing, participatory position. So there you go, the textbook definition. So let's consider events a little bit here. Let's take a look at events. And the view I think most of us has that events, they can be expensive. And I do have some budget data I'm going to share with you, but I think we acknowledge that there are certain kinds of events that we can certainly spend a lot on if we choose to, and others really aren't that expensive. But generally, I think people look at events as being one of the more expensive things they do. There's also an idea that events can be high risk, and to be fair, they can. And the idea here is, what if you throw a party and no one comes? How embarrassing is that? There's always this risk of the event not being well received, not being well attended, not meeting its objectives. So there's a risk component to events that often is not associated with other things that marketers do. And then next, events take time, and they do, logistically and administratively, and just because they are an actual real-time event, they play out over a period of time. And in fact, let's look at this a little bit more deeply. We have some data, and we asked in the Association marketing survey that is now in its third year. We'll talk about that some more in a minute. But we asked a question in the last two surveys. What takes up most of your time? And these are the answers that you all gave us through our survey. Number one, you can see internal meetings. I think that's the scourge of everyone everywhere. Email marketing, content creating, and finally events was fourth on the list in terms of things that take up time. So that gives you some more perspective on events. Well, let's look at events a little bit differently. So events, let's look at the reason why well-orchestrated events or events involvement is so effective. Events provide an experience, one that is ideally intentionally designed and engineered with the participants in mind. Participation in an event creates an experience. We can all appreciate the power of an experience. There's a vast difference between hearing about something and experiencing it directly. So an experience makes a powerful imprint, for good or bad, on the participant. That imprint produces two things. A memory, and again, this is good or bad, and a set of feelings. Obviously, when we architect an event, even the smallest one, we aim to produce positive memories and feelings. Who has great memories of the last marketing brochure they saw? Anyone? Anyone? Yeah, me either. Did the last marketing email that you received invoke positive feelings? If you can even remember the last one that you saw? Yeah, and I think you get my point. The things we experience, however, they stay with us and they affect us. These experiences that produce these memories and feelings are the building blocks of engagement. When we participate in something, we are far more likely to engage because we recognize that active engagement rather than passive spectatorship is the way we gain something. So when we engage in an event with those who are responsible for it, it builds relationship and a desire to understand, if not greater understanding itself. All of this together lead to that relationship characteristic that we most covet in our members and customers, trust and loyalty. Events are perhaps the fastest path to this relational level, and that is why events are so important. Here's another way of looking at it. As marketers, we can spend months and even years executing a carefully thought out nurturing campaign with members, prospects, or customers. And by the way, we should do this. But here's the thing. One quality encounter with a customer, prospect, or member at an event can advance the relationship well beyond what can happen as a result of months of email or direct mail sends. That's why we like events so much. So there's kind of some perspective on events. Let's take a look at, all right, so I get it, Jerry. Do they work? Let's find out. So we know they work, and here's why. Because you told us so in our annual High Road Demand Metric Association Marketing Survey. By the way, this survey is now active and in its third consecutive year. So Suzanne, I don't have the link. Maybe we can share that through the interface here. But we would love for you to participate in the third year of this survey if you haven't already. But this is data we have. And you can see the list. Events are at the top of the list of effective tactics. Right there, I've circled it. And they're in good company. Of the many things that association marketers can choose to do, events rank at the top in terms of effectiveness. So there you have that. And from the same study, we can see that associations make heavy use of events, ranking second on the list of tactics usage. Now, by the way, I think associations probably are heavier users of events than B2B organizations that I spend more of my time working with. But even in the for-profit B2B world, events are really at the top of the pyramid still. So what associations have told us is that events work and that they are a go-to marketing approach. These facts about events effectiveness and usage provide really strong motivation to ensure that we're making events as effective as they can be. So with that kind of as setting the table, what I'm going to do now is talk about what we learned in a recent study about events engagement. So to set your expectations, I'm not going to share best practices about how to choose good venues or how to fold napkins into cool origami shapes, although those are all good things, and I couldn't do origami if I tried. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to focus on the engagement aspect of events, since that is ultimately what we need out of the events we either produce or we participate in. And as you're going to find out, technology plays a role in this. So this data comes from a study that we published in October of last year. So it's pretty recent. Just to give you some background on it, we collected 265 responses during this study, most of which we were able to use. They were complete enough for inclusion in our analysis. So we had a nice sample, in other words. And this study that I'm about to reference is available on the Demand Metric website. It does require a membership to access it. But the good news for you is I'm going to share the salient findings with you today. So even if you can't get at the whole document, you're going to get what I think you need, and you're welcome to reach out to me afterwards if you want to know more. So let's talk a little bit about the events landscape in a bit more detail. I mentioned at the start of our discussion how broad event types are in scope, and in our survey we took a census of sorts on what kinds of events the respondents use. And you can see that on the screen. I apologize if the print's a little bit small, but at the very top in terms of type, it would be conferences, followed by trade shows, followed by webinars, and it kind of goes on down the list. And as you can see, at the top of this list, we have conferences, trade shows, and this is not a ranking of effectiveness, by the way. This is simply what our study participants told us they do. We also analyzed the simultaneous use of event types found in this chart because, very few people, very few organizations do just one thing and one thing only. So here's what we found out when we did that analysis. Just 10% of people in our study host or participate in just a single type of event. It's really much more common to see multiple types in use. And in our study, we had 63% of our respondents that were utilizing 4 or more event types, and 21% were utilizing 7 or more. So if you're doing events, you're probably doing lots of different kinds of events. So I told you we would talk a little bit about budget, so here is some budget data. So the perception, as I mentioned, is events tend to be expensive, and we found that 20% of the organizations in our study are allocating half or more of their marketing budgets to events. So let that sink in for a minute. That seems like a lot, right? 20% of the organizations in our study are allocating half or more of their marketing budgets to events. So they are definitely sold out and committed to events as a primary marketing strategy. Because events are so highly relational, if relationships are the key to your success, well, you're going to spend on things that foster better relationships, and events certainly fall in that category. So let me give you some more data around this particular chart. The average budget allocation from our study falls within the 30 to 39% allocation range. So still a good chunk of money being spent on events. We also found that there was no relationship between the budget allocation for events and the size of the organization. So it doesn't matter whether you're really small or really big, that kind of budget allocation seems to hold pretty steady. That's what we found anyway in our study. All right, so there's some data. Let's take a look now at the importance of improving engagement. We wanted to get a benchmark on the overall importance of customer or member engagement, and that's what we're showing you here in this chart. Regardless of any other goals for event marketing, we wanted to find out how important is improving engagement. So the color coding here, blue represents important, orange represents not important, and green is in the middle with neutral. It's equal importance with other goals for events. We see here the importance of engagement relative to all other event goals a company might have, and customer engagement is either the most or one of the most important goals that people in our study had for their events. That's 78% who said that. Events provide a forum or otherwise facilitate the opportunity for customer engagement better than most approaches an organization could take. Regarding those other approaches marketing could take to better engage customers, we asked our participants to rate events' performance in the area of producing engagement. So let's take a look at that result, okay? So here's the chart on that. Events are perceived as a better approach for engaging customers or members, better than other things an organization could do, as almost 3/4 of our study participants told us. So with this kind of validation, it would be logical to assume that many of an organization's new customers or members have an encounter with the organization at an event during their buying journey or customer lifecycle, right? I mean, wouldn't that make sense? Why wouldn't an organization, therefore, engineer some events directly in the path of prospects on their journey? It makes a lot of sense to do so, but does it occur? Well, that's one of the things we found out as well. And here's what we learned. Almost 2/3 of study participants report that less than half of their new members or customers encounter them at an event somewhere along the buying journey. So to me, this really seems like a missed opportunity. The data from our study shows that events create engagement, so we got that, and better than is possible through other approaches. And better engagement, and engagement in general, means things happen faster relationally. But despite the apparent effectiveness of events at driving engagement, a majority of prospects who become, either a customer or a member haven't encountered the organizations they ultimately become part of during their journey. So there's an opportunity here to leverage events to influence the buyer's journey that many firms are missing out on. Let's take a look now at the event encounter rate and budget allocation. So let me try to make sure I don't confuse you on what you're seeing here. We've already looked at budget allocation, so this is another look at budget allocation. But what I've done in this chart is I've filtered budget allocation by the event encounter rate data I just shared on the previous chart. So if that makes sense. So what you see in the blue are the percentages for people who said, yeah, our event encounter rate is above the average, and in the orange, it's below the average. And so if you keep that in mind, I think it makes it easier to decipher what we're trying to say on this chart. What we saw was higher event budget allocations result in more engagement. There's definitely a connection between the spend and the engagement. Those that are experiencing an above average encounter rate, like I said, the blue bars, are also allocating a greater portion of their budgets to events. You can, it seems, buy better engagement. What this chart really says is that you get what you pay for when it comes to events and engagement. While the study didn't explore the ways organizations are spending the funds allocated to events, it's likely that higher spending is going towards participating in a greater number of events, or more heavily promoting events, or investing in event management technology, or some combination of those things. So we'll look at the ROI of events later on in our presentation, but for now I just wanted to share that with you. Now let's next turn our attention towards the life cycle, understanding attendees in the life cycle stage. So when advancing the relationship with attendees through better engagement is the goal, the event staff can gain a considerable head start with the right intelligence about attendees. Now, doesn't that seem intuitive, right? We want to know who's at our events, sure, but we don't want to just know who's at our events. We want to understand, where they're coming from, and where they are in relationship with us. So this chart from our study shows how well event staff understand, number one, who will attend events, who's at an event, and number two, where the attendees are in that relationship life cycle. So if you total the percentages of the blue bars, which are the highest level of understanding of these things, you'll see that more than half of the study participants claim a good or complete understanding of those two characteristics, who will attend and where they are in their life cycle. We found that this level of understanding turns out to be a major predictor of an organization's overall satisfaction with their events marketing strategy and the results they're getting. And I'm going to share some more satisfaction data in an upcoming slide. So let's keep the focus right now on the staff, the sales staff or the event staff, and how they learn about the people at the events. You know, for some events, it's really easy, right? If you have a really small, intimate luncheon, well, no problem. But if you're, you know, hosting a bigger event or participating in a bigger event, it's a lot harder to get your arms around who that belongs to us is there and what do we know about them. So as I just shared, understanding event attendees and where they are in the life cycle is a major contributor to getting happy and satisfactory results from your events. We examined in our study how the event, marketing, or sales teams learn in advance about the attendees that are going to be at the events. And this chart shows you that personal knowledge is the #1 way. It's the primary way staff learn in advance about event attendees, just their memory, right? This is what I remember. This is what I know. Despite the link between understanding where event attendees are in their life cycle and their relationship and that link to satisfaction with events, slightly over 15% of study participants rarely or never prep in advance. For those that do, over half of them use just a single approach listed in this chart. In most cases, that approach is personal knowledge. We rely on what we remember about attendees. Sometimes personal knowledge is pretty rich and detailed. Other times, though, it's kind of vague and incomplete. So basically, to study data is making a strong case for doing a better job of doing your homework on event attendees prior to an event. And like any homework assignment, the easier it is to do, the more likely it is that it's going to get done. So technology can help. So let's take a look at the technology landscape. It provides an avenue to help sales staff at events gain insights into the attendees that are there. And the chart you see on the left shows the usage of technology such as a tablet device or a smartphone app by event staff during events to research attendees and log interactions, because one's as important as the other. As you can see, most teams staffing events don't have technology at their disposal during the event, and that's the green pie slice. The blue one is they do have access. The little sliver of orange says don't know. So in addition to the tech provided to the event and sales staff to use during events, there's also event management technology, platforms designed to help event teams better manage and interact with event attendees. And these platforms typically include things like event registration, email, check-in, and reporting capabilities that are integrated with the user's CRM system. And the goal of these platforms is to facilitate and optimize meaningful interactions at events. So the pie chart on the right shows the current adoption rate for event management technology. And here we see that most organizations are not currently using event management technology. So that's, again, the green slice that says they're not using it. So our analysis of event tech platforms usage yielded some pretty good insights, such as this. #1 is satisfaction. Those firms that use event management tech are twice as likely to be satisfied with their event strategy and results compared to those who are not using technology. And in terms of ROI, the ROI for events experienced by event management technology users is almost 50% higher than the ROI realized by non-users of event tech. So pretty compelling business case. You probably think, what, are you selling event technology? You know, actually, I'm not. But we studied this and we thought it was pretty important. So we've talked about ROI. Let's throw some data up there. We've got detail on ROI. I think it's one of the most important metrics and one of the hardest to measure accurately for any marketing initiative. In our study, we asked participants to share the average ROI in events above the costs. And what we found is just 8% of our study participants reported a loss or break even on events. So that's the good news. Events seem to be providing a nice return. This ROI data is encouraging in terms of the percent of responses that report a positive ROI. If you want to know the average ROI for events that we measured in our study, it falls within the 25 to 34% range. Now what's discouraging is that the second most frequently provided ROI response, and that's at the very bottom and the longest orange bar, is I don't know. indicating that too many organizations don't or can't measure it. The average ROI for events measured by this study when events management tech is in use ranges from 36 to 45%. So I told you it was 50% higher, so there are the ranges. The use of this technology helps produce a greater return on events, and the other thing it does, it allows you to measure that return with greater precision, and that's usually the challenge, is just how do you measure it. So let's talk about satisfaction now. And the good news, folks, is we're coming into the home stretch, so if you've been napping, wake up and think about questions you might have for Suzanne or myself. But let's talk about satisfaction. We measure the overall SAT with events, strategy, and results. And you can see from this chart that over half of our study participants are satisfied with these things, and those are the two bars in blue. So I've just shared the highlights of our study on events engagement, taking you through lots of data, lots of charts. Hopefully you don't feel like you were drinking from a fire hose, but I do hope it has helped you see the current events marketing landscape, perhaps from a different perspective. And it wouldn't do for me to just say, that's all, folks. Hope you enjoyed the show. Let me share what I think are some takeaways from our study that we did on events engagement. And if you're looking to improve your events marketing outcomes, perhaps these thoughts are some ways that you can do that. So let me jump into three things, the first of which is this. We all want to do this, right? Let's boost participation. Events seem to be a core part of many organizations' marketing strategies, including at associations, according to our study, with approximately 1/3 of many marketing budgets allocated to events. And for a good reason. Events are better than most other things we can do to create engagement. Events have a historical role in the B2B world anyway as a lead gen strategy. What's come into clearer view is that the effectiveness of events is really for driving engagement, and that's kind of the holy grail. Relationships are one thing, but in relationships with engaged customers, members, and prospects, quite another thing. So few other marketing approaches provide high levels of efficacy at engagement like events do. As important as events are as an avenue for engagement, this study points to some signs of neglect, or maybe better said, just simply poor stewardship of events as a resource. Because almost 2/3 of study participants report that less than half of their new members or customers encounter them at an event, and events being such a great way to accelerate that relationship. Now, it's unrealistic to expect every prospect is going to have an event encounter during the early part of their buying journey, but we have to admit it's ideal when it does happen. And marketers should put enough events in the path of every prospect so that the odds of an encounter get higher. Every marketer wants to maximize customer and prospect participation in events, but how? Well, this study shows a strong correlation between the use of event technology and the increased likelihood that these encounters will occur. So that's my first takeaway. Second one, kind of touched on this already, but do your homework. The more the sales, marketing, or event staff know about attendees in advance, the greater the satisfaction with the event result and the event's strategy as a whole. Again, I said this is easy if you're hosting an intimate luncheon, but if you're hosting a big conference, suddenly not quite as easy. This places a requirement on staff to do their homework on attendees, and no one likes to do homework. The exception is when the homework's easy, and that's what technology does for us. Tablets or smartphone apps that make it easy for event staff to both research attendees, know where they are in the customer lifecycle, and then also log interactions. That's powerful. That kind of technology enables better engagement, and it simplifies capturing all the metrics we want to have about our events. And so that takes me to my last takeaway, which has to do with metrics, and that is have an events strategy report card. So there's your report card on the screen. Every marketing initiative needs a set of success metrics or KPIs. And our study shows that the top measure in use for events is the number of leads generated, at least in the B2B world it is. No doubt marketers covet leads, but measuring the volume of leads an event produces, that's really pretty hollow. I mean, there's some value in it for sure, but there's much more to know than just how many impressions you got at an event, how many leads you captured. What you really want is, what is the financial and relational impact of an event? So ROI, for example, is a very meaningful metric. Less than a third of our study participants knew what it was. The problem is usually they just don't have the data or a reliable way of collecting the data to figure out the ROI. And technology comes to our rescue, again, in that regard. So if organizations are spending as much as a third of their marketing budgets on events, how can they not know what kind of return they're getting on that spend? So hopefully, everyone's going to be inspired to go figure that out. All right, wow, I've done all the talking. Suzanne, you didn't throw any interrupts in to get me to stop. So let's see if we have any questions.
We do have a couple of questions. All right, and they are some good ones. So as all questions are, I guess I should say. But these, I think they're going to be, it's a good thing you're a professor, Jerry, because these might have a three-part answer on your part. So here's the first one. So you kind of made the point that that one of the key factors of events is that they create memories, right? And that how valuable this is in really being able to increase engagement. The question is about this idea, but the person is saying, look, in reality, only about less than 10% of my entire association really attends our annual event, which is kind of where they receive this kind of key experience, et cetera. And they want to know, so if less than 10% of my membership is attending my annual event, yet this is one of the key ways to make memories that relate to engagement, what happens to the rest of the 90% who really are only interacting with my organization through digital? And do you have any thoughts on that about what they should do or how they can think about that and maybe extending that event experience, et cetera?
Yeah, well, and that's a very insightful question, and that's a challenge. So just to set everyone's expectations, I'm not going to give you the magic formula, but of course I have thoughts, right? So let's think about this. The challenge is that you have a big kind of flagship event. I think that's probably true of lots of organizations, for-profit, nonprofit, both. They have a once a year major thing we want everyone to come to, but 10% do or 15% or whatever, a small number come. Now, let's look at the people who do come. No doubt they're going to have a fabulous experience, and that is the building block, right? So experience comes first. Experience is what creates the memories and the feelings, and let's just talk, branding 101 for a minute. As marketers, we don't really care, if we're honest, we don't care as much about awareness. I realize we all are chasing awareness. That's, under the marketing performance plan, create awareness, true. But awareness doesn't lead to brand loyalty. What leads to strong affinity with a brand or an organization is the feelings that they have. It is an emotion. Awareness isn't an emotion, but loyalty is. And so that's why all this stuff is so important. We want to have an experience. We want to give them one. Out of that experience come these memories and feelings, and it creates engagement and the stuff we've talked about, right? So back to the problem, though. I've got this big event. I invest heavily. It's well designed. Only 10% of the people come. Well, some of the things that you could look at are, what other kinds of events could you offer that maybe don't have the same, full memories and feelings impact, but kind of get something started with the other 90%. And that's what I love about this whole concept of events marketing, is how broad in scope it really is. So a conference, it's at the top of the list for good reason, but webinars, like what we're doing today, granted they don't have the same impact, but they still do something for you, especially if they're executed well, and a whole host of other things. And so I would say, the best answer I can give you is, this is where the creativity needs to come in about what are some things we can do interim to the big annual conference that are events that create an experience that will produce engagement. They don't have to be physical. They can be virtual. They don't have to be big budget events. sometimes I think the effectiveness of a series of small-scale events can equal or surpass, one big annual thing that you do. So, Suzanne, I'll shut up because I probably rambled, but those are some of the thoughts if I understood the question properly, and I hope whoever asked it, that was something in there was helpful.
All right, thank you. All right, here's the next one. Again, the chart that's showing how many people don't know how to measure ROI really resonated out there with one of our attendees. And this person is saying really what they're struggling with is, they're screaming like they want to be able to measure ROI, but the executives year over year are only hammering them on how many registrants do we have, how many registrants do we have compared to last year, right? The phenomenon in the event world is known as putting butts in seats. So do you have any advice on how the people here can really sell this up the chain in saying, you know what, we're focusing on the wrong count here of number of attendees. We need to move. I love your slides about talking about moving it into looking at life cycle and how much data do you actually have about your attendees. But advice there on how to refocus to real ROI metrics for being able to sell it up into the executives and then into the board.
It's interesting because this may be an area where for-profit, non-profit are a little bit different. In the for-profit world, it's usually the other way around. It's usually the executive saying, I love that you got lots of butts in seats, but what do we get out of it? What was our return? What was the ROI? And it almost sounds like this question, it's a little bit flipped, right? It's like the executives are saying, hey, we want people there. I think that both views are correct, but they need to be merged. And we understand that an event is nothing without butts in seats. I love your phrase, by the way. I'm using that. If you don't have butts in seats, you have nothing, right? But it can't end with that. That's just one side of the coin. That is a crucial ingredient to what the real outcome is. And so I think that what marketers have to do with this is say, all right, that is in the critical path to the outcome that we want. But here's the outcome that we want. So yes, it's wise to measure that. It's wise to promote it, to do the things we can do to increase those numbers. But we're always doing it with an eye to an outcome. And here's what that outcome is. And in most cases, we would love to be able to say, and all those butts and seats got us this in terms of a financial impact, ROI or something else. And so marketing's job, whether the executives realize it or not, is to figure out how to connect all of its activities, but certainly events are included, to the bottom line, to what the organization's objectives are. And so sometimes marketers are going to find themselves out on an island without a lot of people saying, yes, go, get that ROI data, we want it, go team go. And other times there's going to just be ignorance about why it even matters to look at it. But regardless of the situation, I think the savviest marketers, the ones that are the best stewards of their resources, are always worried about that and always pushing for it, even if they're not getting pressed by executives. So summarize my rambling there. It's two sides of the same coin. You got to have the numbers, but you also got to have the impact.
Yeah, love that. And I know I spend many a night up worrying about those things, even if no one's asking me. It's exactly right, because you need to say, how can I really make a direct tie from all this effort that we're putting into what we're actually getting out of it. I think we all share a little bit of the worry-wart syndrome in the marketing world. I think that's part of our DNA probably. So the last question is, again, I think a common one that many people in the association world are experiencing, which is that, here's the question, our events are declining in terms of registration. We think it's because of our shifting target markets, meaning that they're becoming younger and younger. Do you have any data or reports that can talk about engagement strategies now that we're, that basically break it up by different generations, right? And so this question in particular is going after the almighty millennials of saying, it's not the same as it used to be. What should we do with this? Do you have any advice on how we can get some data around specifically what we need to do for changing our event strategy?
Yeah, well, it's easy to say, yeah, millennials are different, and they are. I believe they're different, but not different bad, just different. And so I don't have data, but here's my advice. You have to go get data. And so I think when you're starting to experience, erosion in terms of participation and engagement in some of your events, that tells you it's time to put your research hat on. And I think one of the best things you can do is make a pretty in-depth effort of going to your target audience. And I think in the case of events, you have an opportunity to go get people who have participated in one of your events and those who have not, because you want to compare. But you have to go ask the tough questions in research mode that sometimes marketers don't relish hearing the responses to, that saying, okay, what provides value in an event? So you want to ask it two ways. Grade our event. And most organizations do that, right? They have surveys, post-event surveys. What do you think? And a few people take the time to fill them out and turn them in, but you have an incomplete set of data. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is really what you would probably term voice of the customer, where you make a proactive effort to say, all right, we're going to go identify, a dozen people on both sides of the divide, been to events, not been to our events, and we're going to ask them, what do you look for? What do you need? What provides value? How do you want it to work? What has to happen there? How do you walk away saying this was really helpful? And it's a much more detailed level of research. If events are that important to you, you need to put that kind of effort into finding out what your target audience is expecting and then go give it to them. I mean, there's really no shortcut to that. It takes time, but the payback is huge on getting it right. And you have to also understand you probably aren't going to get everything turned around in a single cycle, especially if you're talking about an annual conference. So you have an annual conference coming up in the second half of the year. Go do that research right now. Go do that work. Re-engineer the conference based on what you find out. But you're not going to see huge changes immediately in the next conference. You're going to have to let that kind of work through the network of people who you try to serve and let it get a reputation kind of built back up, if that makes any sense.
Makes total sense. And I think one of the big, if I can add my own 2 cents in this one of the big take-homes, or the idea that your conversation today really struck with me, was a question that I think, again, many of us don't want to answer, which is this. How many of us have taken that registration list that we know we're going to have of people showing up, and how many of us have pulled together all of the data that we actually have about these registrants to understand them comprehensively right before in our event planning process, as we're planning our promotions, the during piece of it, and the post-event kind of follow-up. How many of us have been really looking at that registrant list from the point of view of where they are in their life cycle, where they are in their buyer's journey? I think that is probably on the to-do list of most everyone on the call. I think that's a really great one. And most of us have the data. We could get that data and pull it together from our association management systems, certainly our marketing automation systems are going to help that immensely. But most of us can pull together some sort of, and again, I think to your point, that's probably a goal, that we continue to increase the comprehensiveness of those profiles over time as we look to get more touch points and more data on each individual. But I think most of us would probably have a very good crack at really looking at it from a more in-depth perspective as who's actually have attended our events in the past and who is coming in the door for the future events. I think that alone, that exercise you pointed out there, could be extremely insightful, and equipping your staff with that data. Because I think, one of the charts you showed was that most of the staff, they're woefully unprepared about who they're actually going to meet and interact with, et cetera. And I think that's probably a good area where marketing can pick that up as a to-do list and help to bridge the gap from the event side, which tends to be on the logistics, kind of tactical side, and with the educational professionals that they're working with who are providing the curriculum side. I think there could be a really nice area there where marketing has a bigger role than just, again, sending out the promotional emails to say, attend the event, right, early bird special. So I took that personally as a really nice to-do list of another kind of key takeaway of how to crack the code of better getting to better event ROI. So those are all the questions we have. Yeah, please, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. I appreciate everyone's attentiveness and interest in the topic and asking those questions. Those were all great questions. So look forward to doing this again. Suzanne, we have another one coming up, I know, so I will try to make sure that I include the fun quotient in our next one as well.
Thank you very much, Jerry, for being our guest analyst, and thanks everybody for attending. We will be following up with more take-home materials, and as Jerry mentioned, you can get copies of both the 2014 and the 2015 State of Digital Marketing and Associations report, as well as the new survey for 2016 is open, and that will be released in August at the ASE's annual meeting, as always. So with no further ado, thank you, everyone. We wish you a great day. Do good work. Take care.
Bye, everyone.